Everybody, it's Mike from the Mike Wagner Show, powered by Sonic Web Studios, brought to you by our official sponsor, the Mike Wagner Show, international warring author, Me and Molson's Here Missing, available on Amazon and paperback and ebook. Also brought to you by Sweet Summits by Serena Wagner, based on the life of David Na on Amazon. Keyword Sweet Summits, Serena Wagner, and brought to you by the Sensei of Swing, Eric Diamond, with the latest All of Me, new music coming soon to your favorite platform near you, ericdiamondmusic.com. Make sure you check it out today. We're here with an amazing gentleman who's a Grammy nominated singer, songwriter, and founder and leader of a wonderful band from Woodstock, New York. He's been in 5 decades of music. He's a seasoned live performer, prolific recording artist, versatile multi-instrumentalist, and award-winning record producer and engineer. He performed with a number of groups since 2000, and also been in numerous fest, theaters, clubs, art centers, averaging 150 shows a year. And he's been inducted in New York City chapter Blues Hall of Fame, the Canada South Blues. Also collabed with the band from 85 to 1999. And he and his group have a new release, and they're just crowing around by now. Live, ladies and gentlemen, Plus Studios outside Woodstock, New York. The amazing Grammy-nominated singer, songwriter, founder, and leader of the Crow Matix from Woodstock, New York. And they're crowing around with this one, ladies and gentlemen, Professor Louie of Professor Louie and the Crow Max. Professor Louie, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks so much for having me on, Mike. And that was quite an intro, I have to say. Very impressive.
Well, I got to say this too, with you being in a band and you being 5 decades of music, Grammy nominated, I mean, you deserve this. Am I right? So,
Well, we've definitely put our time in, that's for sure, and continue to do so. So we
mhm.
definitely are out there playing.
You got that right. And of course, you spent half a century in music, Grammy nominated singer, songwriter, and founder leader of the Crow Max from Woodstock, New York. You're a seasoned live performer, prolific recording artist, versatile multi instrumentalist, award winning record producer, and engineer. You performed with a number of groups since 2000 and numerous fests, theaters, clubs, and art centers, averaging 150 shows a year. You've been inducted into New York City Chapter Blues Hall of Fame, Canada South Blues, and also collabed with a band from 85 to 99 until Rick Danko's death. And you got christened Professor Louie, which I liked as well. And you also had some music as well. We'll be talking about Crowin Around, featuring Elevate Yourself, Steadfast and True. And before getting out, Professor Louie, tell us how you first got started.
Well, I first got started in Peekskill, New York. That's where I was born. And they had a great music department in the junior high school, elementary school, actually, where you could choose which instrument to play. Great music teachers. And they even opened it up in the summer where we could spend 5, 6 days a week down at the school in the summer, hanging out with your buddies and gals and practicing and playing music, and put a band together when I was about 15 or 16. And, haven't really looked back too much except for odd jobs when, money was a little tight. And played on a lot of different circuits before I got with the band, which is one reason I got my job with the band. So, started off with a lot of R&B circuit. That's what we used to play, especially it was close to New York City, Mike. And at that time, New York City was a happening place for live music and dance music. You had all kinds of clubs on Times Square, and you would play there 6 nights a week, 6, 7 sets a night with all kinds of different musicians and people that I'm still friends with today that are still around with us. And so it was a great training ground, and you can go and watch people and learn, how to do it, and saw some of the greatest bands, at that time. Um, like, the Twist was big when we first sort of got started there. I just used to go see Joey D at the Peppermint Lounge and go see Jimi Hendrix at when he was playing in just bars with us and clubs. And so it was a great training ground, to check out, and all kinds of music. Plus, where I grew up in Peekskill, they had all kinds of music also, and all kinds of different varieties of people, Italian music, Greek music, Jewish music. I had a great cantor who taught me how to sing. And then I got after I did that R&B circuit for quite a while, and blues circuit, we used to play with a fellow by the name of Paul Osher, who was with Muddy Waters for a long time. We'd be on the road with him. I decided that I moved to downtown Brooklyn, and downtown Brooklyn was a melting pot of a lot of great artists. And in the subway system, in the subway station in downtown Brooklyn, Myrtle and Lawrence, there were, they have tobacco stores and newspaper stores down below. And one of them was empty, and it turned out it was an after hours club that would start around midnight and go to like 8 or 9 in the morning on
Oh,
weekends.
wow.
Yeah, it was quite a scene. And the greatest musicians lived in Brooklyn because couldn't afford New York so much. A lot of them, and they had homes and they had families, raised families. But on Monday nights was a gospel night, and it was they rented out the After Hours Club for Monday nights. So the greatest gospel groups in America would be down there rehearsing, or if they were coming through. So I got to see the Highway QCs and the Soul Stirrers and gospel heavyweights and gospel Brooklyn All Stars. And there was one group called the Mighty Gospel Giants of Brooklyn who had albums out. And so I went on the road with them, which was interesting. And I did it for about 3, 4 years and saw the greatest singers that were alive. I used to go see James Cleveland and, Aretha Franklin's father. We would go to Detroit. We would make a record. We would stop in Newark, New Jersey every Sunday, cut a 45 and pick up the 45 that we did the week before and then go out on the road and sell the 45s. So I did that for about 3, 4 years, which really gave me great training for how to play. So that's how I really got started in real music.
Oh my gosh, I think that is a really good train ground. Sometimes we wish we did that. And of course, Jimi Hendrix in his heyday. I mean, that's got to be amazing. I have to say
Yeah, it
that.
was
So,
Jimmy James at the time. Jimmy James and the Flames. We used to go watch because there were all those R&B bands, in Brooklyn and in New York City. There were all kinds of clubs to go play. I used to go. There was a place called the Metropole that was in Manhattan, and they would specialize in jazz in the 50s, but in the 60s it moved into rock and roll clubs, and they would have the drummers in the window in the afternoon, and sometimes you'd be walking by and there's Gene Krupa in the window playing. Just it
oh,
was a
okay.
gig. It was a gig. That's what it was. So you would just walk around all day and check all that kind of stuff out. So it was good to see. And then they had another club called the Cheetah that was in New York, and that had the Latin. That was more of a Latin band club that had the Fania All Stars, and so you just go see them. And so it was a great place to grow up. And so I got bitten by that music bug to have a good time. Would have a good time.
And it sounds like it too. Every time you think about Harlem, New York, and all that, makes you think of the Cotton Club too.
Well, there was that, and a great jazz. That was of course before our time, but we would go up and catch a show at the Apollo or Minton's, which was a good jazz room to go check out, or New York to downtown, the Vanguard, and places like that. So, and it was cheap, pretty cheap to get in those days, even though we didn't have a lot of money, but we were working. We were working in New York. I was with a group that worked 6 nights a week at all kinds of different places, and so there was a little bit of money,
Hmm. It made
and
me
you get
think
to
of the
see.
days too. I was reading about it, and we were talking with a friend that you work part-time jobs, but you still gather enough money to go see a band, even for like a buck or something. And
That's right.
drinks and all that, they're just a buck these days. I think it's like you wish you go back to those days.
Well, that was a good way to expose to the music. And what we would do is like I drove a cab in Manhattan, and that way I had a car and you make some money. And then you had a way of sort of turning the light off on top so they would think you had a fare. And then you just drive around and stop at the clubs and you could park just about anywhere because it was a cab. So that was a good way to do it also. And we were working. I mean, we were playing a lot of music and checking out some great musicianship.
Oh my gosh, that had to be amazing. And of course, being in school and all that stuff. Was it one exact precise moment that simply influenced you into what you do in the rest of your career?
Well, I got to say, it was really from the music teachers in school because what they did in the summertime is they would have a big band, like maybe Tuesday nights in the school, and you get to hear, a 40-piece band or a 30-piece band of professionals and some students, and you go down there and watch it, and that sound would just hook you right in. You just couldn't resist it. And then you go down again to New York and see some of the saxophone players. At that time, before guitar players were the rock and roll champions, it was tenor saxophone players, which to me was always a little bit more exciting in a way. And so you get to see, Sam the Man Taylor or Lee Allen or any of those kind of guys playing, and that was great. Or you go to at one point, Bill Doggett was at the great organist Bill Doggett, who had Honky Tonk and all those great hits with Clifford Scott playing sax and Mickey Baker on guitar sometimes, and he would be at a barbecue place on 8th Avenue every Thursday, and so you go see one of the greatest organists and he worked for Roulette Records. So a lot of the big hits you heard out of Roulette in the '50s and early '60s was really Bill Doggett's band, and that's a lot of them did the Joey D records, and that's why I got popular with them, which was part of the Rascals world and all that, R&B stuff. So you go see Bill Doggett play with Clifford Scott, who was, of course, probably one of the greatest rock and roll sax players ever.
Hmm.
So you go see him in person.
Oh my
Try to,
goodness, that had to be when you talked about one of the greatest in history. It made me think from my era, Clarence Clemens from E Street Band.
right, Clarence Clemens. Well, that was the Asbury Park crew. We go down to Asbury Park and play, and hang out with those guys as much as we could. And at one time, I had a manager that we made quite a bit of money in one of the clubs, maybe on Ganos or the Eighth Wonder, one of them. That we went to Asbury Park, and we played a place called Mrs. J's Beer Garden, and he took all that money from us
Oh
and bought
no.
bought a club next door, which was an old hullabaloo. And we're talking Asbury Park, early '70s, because at one point there were hullabaloos all across the country. That was from the TV show Hullabaloo, and they
Hmm.
bought places and had music. So anyway, he bought the Hullabaloo and Asbury Park, and opened it up as a club called the Sunshine Inn. And we worked that, and we're part of that management scene. Sunshine Inn became a pretty famous place because one of the regulars there that we hung out all the time, Clarence and Bruce Springsteen, they had a group called the Steel Mill. And
Okay.
so we played with them down in Asbury Park for a long time. And then they had riots, and that's what ended that. We left town. It was time to get out between this manager and them. It was time to move on. But that was the Asbury Park, and Asbury Park had a lot of clubs to play. And again, another good R&B dance scene. Bruce's big song was "Dancing in the Street," and we get people pretty crazy with that R&B repertoire.
Hmm. And it made me think of it too. You talked about Bruce and Clarence, being with their group, the Steel Mill. Who else
Yeah.
from the E Street Band was part of that too before it came Bruce and the E Street Band?
Well, the keyboard player, who was a good guy, he was part of it, and little Steven was there. He definitely was part of that world. And then there was I'm trying to think, another fellow who had a band. He had a horn band. He just recently retired, and was around Southside Johnny. Southside Johnny, actually, when I used to go there to listen, because I was horn oriented, musically horn oriented. Southside Johnny, to me, always had the best of all those bands, pretty much. Um, and when I worked for the band, because they were down there at one of the clubs, or when they got the call from Bob Dylan, they were working one of those clubs, and that was a popular band. At that time, they were called the Hawks, because it was after Ronnie Hawkins. And so their reputation was great, and they were still a reputation was still coming through from the Asbury Park scene. So I'm trying to remember the name of the club they worked in, but it was a popular place, very popular.
Hmm. It sounded like it. And who are some of your favorite singers, songwriters, and musicians growing up?
Well, growing up, of course, we all loved little Anthony and people like that. I mean, that was just great to check those guys out. Johnny Maestro, one of the first concerts I saw in Peekskill, at the Harmony with a Crest, where Johnny Maestro is the lead singer. So he was definitely a guy. And then when we moved to Brooklyn, of course, you had the Brooklyn Bridge and all those guys. But
Hmm.
that was one of the first. But the very first show I saw was the Duke of Earl. The old Duke came and sang the tracks. I was pretty impressed with that one. And then the Toys. We worked the concert with the Toys, and I had a group that went on tour with the guy who did My Prayer, which was a great vocal, Johnny Thunder, not Johnny Thunders, but the Black Johnny Thunder. And so it was going back to the R&B time, and checking out all those Smokey Robinson, of course, all the Temptations and all the great
Hmm.
songs that came out of that stuff. And pretty much we liked all the music, everything that came out. I mean, I was studying the jazz world and the gospel world. I loved all the gospel songs since I got to learn most of them firsthand. And so, it's Oscar Peterson. We check out Oscar Peterson and Dave Brubeck and people
Hmm.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I was talking to somebody about Dave Brubeck, and of course, go on my Facebook feed and see all the Dave Brubeck, songs and everything like that. And what would you say your favorite album, your favorite song is from Dave Brubeck?
Well, I have to say, I was honored. At one point, to make a living was during the disco era, because even though I like disco music, I just couldn't seem to land a job at that time musically at playing live. And so I moved into the recording studio. I got behind the glass and learned my engineering trade, because in New York, it was easy to walk into a studio and sweep the floors and learn from the greatest, like Tom Dowd or somebody like that at Atlantic. And, so I got to get pretty proficient as an engineer. And at one point, I engineered a few Dave Brubeck records.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was great. Dave was great because I got friendly with his sons, Dan Brubeck and Chris Brubeck. And of course, Take Five and that whole Live at Carnegie Hall era with Dave Desmond, was great. And so I recorded a record called Quiet as the Moon with Dave Brubeck. And I always really liked it because I was part of it. So I enjoyed that. But of course, you got to love Dave's, Blue Ronda a la Turk. And as he said to me, a lesson to be learned is my biggest hit was something I didn't write and I didn't play the solo. And it was a drum solo, and that was Take Five. So Dave was great to learn from. And as he said to me, that he owned part of Fantasy Records. That was Dave's label in San
Hmm.
Francisco. And when he left them, he was the biggest seller on Fantasy. And he left them because I think he told me he got a 20 record deal with Columbia. And so his own record label sued him when he left.
Really? Oh
Yeah, we
my
never
gosh.
got
He
talks.
he started his own record label, went to Columbia, and his own
Yeah, because
record
he was a
label
big
sued him.
seller and
I
he
don't
took he
get
took
it.
the job. He took the job, Fantasy Records, which then became a big movie company, and Creedence Clearwater ended up on Fantasy Records. And so yeah, so Dave and I would talk a lot of, because as an engineer, you're talking a little bit more to the artist sometimes than a player, because you're just hanging around listening to mixes, or you might have to mix records while they sit around and check out what's going on. And I
Mm.
always made a habit of one reason I got hired so much with real musicians when I was engineering and on that side of the glass was I would always have three tape machines running. So I would never miss any rehearsals or anything they played. So I would have like a little 2-track running, and maybe when we started out 8-track, 16-track running, and then maybe a cassette deck running. So nothing ever got missed. And at the end of the sessions, at the end of the day, like with a guy like Dave, I would just hand him these tapes, and extremely appreciative because, one time when we got first started, they had the unions. You couldn't touch a tape machine. Only union people ran a tape machine. An
Okay.
engineer couldn't touch a tape machine. It was a union job. So a lot of times you'd be in the middle of a great take in a great situation, and they would have to take a break because it was union.
Oh my gosh. What a
So
way to kill a great job.
yeah,
Now
that
I
would
know
happen.
why I'm against unions. It's like,
Well,
hey, we're doing great. Up, take a break.
gotta take
Oh,
a break. So, when I started doing that, I got very friendly with a lot of the artists that I was able to engineer for. But anyway, that was a good experience. So, that's when I started listening to a lot more Dave Brubeck and people. And, that was a good job for a while. I got pretty proficient at it.
hmm. You certainly did as well too. You're also proficient at being with the Crow Matix as well too. We'll find out in 1 minute with Professor Louie. But first, you listen to the Mike Wagner Show at the MikeWagnerShow.com, powered by SonicWeb Studios. Visit online at SonicWebStudios.com for all your needs. Look at a professional website without breaking your budget. SonicWeb Studios is the answer. SonicWeb Studios offers fast, affordable custom web designs that blow the competition away. Call today 1-800-303-3960. It's 1-800-303-3960 or email to support@sonicwebstudios.com. Mention the Mike Wagner Show, get 20% off your first project. Sonic Web Studios, take your image to the next level. Also, time to give official shout out to our official sponsor, the Mike Wagner Show, international warring author Mia Molson Zia. If you love fast-paced mysteries, you love Missing by Mia Molson Zia, available on Amazon and paperback and ebook. Missing is fast-paced and intriguing with an unforgettable twist. Takes place in 4 countries, 2 strangers, 1 target, where truth is illusion and those you love be the first go missing. It's available on Amazon and paperback and ebook. Missing by Mia Molson Zia has gone great reviews. An Evil Evan and George by Howard celebrities, including Joanna Cassie, Forrest Riley, and many others. So grab your copy today for It Goes Missing by me and Molson Zia, available on Amazon. Coming soon, Missing 2 by me and Molson Zia, double suspense, double the fun. Check it out on Amazon. Also, the Mike Wagner Show is brought to you by Sweet Psalmist by Serena Wagner, based on the life of David, including 30 exquisite paintings and King David Psalms. Sweet Psalmist gives a new perspective of David through the Psalms he wrote, his time as shepherd where it started, and complicated a turbulent relationship with King Saul. It's story of love, betrayal, repentance, hope, and more. Check out The Sweet Psalmist by Serena Wagner on Amazon. Keyword Sweet Psalmist Serena Wagner. Also brought to you by Sensei Swing, Eric Diamond, whose latest release, All of Me, featuring the title track, I've Got a New Heartache, Bring Me Sunshine, Strike a Match, and more. Eric's a multi-award winning artist, inducted in numerous Hall of Fames. Entertainer and Album of the Year, will release a new CD soon. Check out the amazing Eric Diamond at ericdiamondmusic.com. Follow on Facebook, YouTube, and all platforms worldwide. Also, check out the Mike Wagner Show at themikewagnershow.com, 40 podcast platforms. Heard 100 countries. Take us with you on any mobile device. Follow us on all social media, Facebook, Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and more for great gift ideas. Amazon.com. Check out the Mike Wagner Show podcast. T-shirts, pop sockets, throw pillows, tote bags, hoodies, makes great gifts 24/7. Amazon.com. Check out the Mike Wagner Show podcast. And for more great gift ideas, go to Amazon.com/me and Molson. Great books, merchandise, and more. And support the Mike Wagner Show, Anchor FM, PayPal, and the MikeWagnerShow.com. We're here with the amazing Grammy-nominated singer, songwriter, and founder leader of the Crow, Matix from Woodstock, New York. 5 decades of music. He's got some great stories. Professor Louie and the Crow Matix here on the Mike Wagner Show. And before we talk about your latest release, Crowin Around, you've been with the band for quite some time. And tell us how you first got involved.
Well, I got involved with the great Rock and Roll Hall of Fame group, the band, through the keyboard player Garth Hudson, who was just one of the greatest keyboard players ever in history, and saxophone playing and accordion playing. I was working on a record with a great folk artist by the name of Artie Trom. It was Happy and Artie Trom. And Artie at that time would call me to play keyboards on records he was doing with Livingston Taylor or any of the folk artists that he might be producing. And I was also engineering quite a few records for him. And Garth Hudson called Artie up one time. We were in the studio working with Livingston Taylor. And Garth said, we want to reform. This is going back to maybe 1985. Said Levon Helm and himself wanted to reform the band because the band sort of didn't end, but they sort of didn't really keep it going after they did this movie, The Last Waltz. And so luckily for me, I was just right there. And Artie Trump said, well, here's Aaron Hurwitz, which is my, Aaron Louie Hurwitz, who is sitting here. He would help you do it because Garth had just moved back from California to Woodstock, New York, and came down and said, well, I have a session. We have 2 sessions we want you to do. And one was a group from Calcutta called Ball Music, the Bengali Balls. They did a record with Bengali Balls in the 70s, and they were coming back to town in the 80s. So I did that record. And then the next record, or the next recording I did with the band, we went to New Orleans to Tipitina's. They were doing a WYES special, which is the television, public TV down there, with Alan Toussaint and a lot of different other great artists from New Orleans. And in those days, it wasn't so easy to capture a rock and roll band on tape and lock it to picture. Now, of course, it's easy to do. In those days, it was very difficult. And fortunately for me, I worked in a studio in Queens, New York that specialized in that beforehand, called Workshop Recording. So we went to New Orleans, and of course, the TV station messed up the recording.
Oh, no.
And so... in those days it was tough to get rock and roll and TV together. And so we went and straightened it out quite a bit after the fact with Alan Toussaint and Thumbs Carlisle, who again was one of the greatest guitar players ever. And so we straightened it out. And from that point on, Levon Helm and Rick Danko and Richard Manuel and Garth Hudson said, okay, you're on board with us. You're going to be a member of the team. And we're going to work towards putting a new band record out. And so therefore that's how I ended up with those guys and spent probably 16 years straight with them, 24 hours a day.
Oh, wow. That is so amazing. One of my favorite bands out there. And from what I understand, that one of them gave the name of Professor Louie. Tell us more about that.
Well, what happened was with the band, each guy in the band used their middle name. It was Mark Levon Helm. It was Jamie Robbie Robertson. It was Garth Hudson. Garth was his middle name. So my middle name was Louie. And fortunately, see, by the time I got with the band, I'd already played on some the major gospel circuits, a lot of R&B and blues circuits. Have been with a lot of well-known people, so I was not intimidated to work with them in the studio. So I was engineering, playing, singing, or doing whatever I had to do live with them, and they had their set. So Rick, one day, when I was playing a duo show, Rick and I would go out of town as a duet, and we'd play, and Rick would say, "Take it, Professor Louie." And and the keyboard players, get those monikers, like Duke Ellington, not to compare myself with the Duke or Count Basie or Professor Longhair or any of that kind of stuff. Fats, they always get some kind of moniker. Fats Waller, Fats Domino. So luckily I wasn't too fat, so Fats didn't quite fit. So Rick would say, "Okay, take it, Professor Louie," and he would do it on TV shows that we would do together or radio shows when we go through Canada, and the name stuck. So people started calling me Professor Louie. And unfortunately, when the guys passed away, or when Rick passed away, which sort of ended the band, because Richard was gone now and Robbie had left way earlier, there was no more band. So that's why we started the Chromatics in 2020, because it was time to move on, get out from all the other chores that I had doing and try to become more of a performer. So we kept the Professor Louie, and the agent said, "Well, if you want to put a band together called Professor Louie, we'll book you." So we had a band with Levon Helm called Levon Helm and the Chromatics, and so we just switched it to Professor Louie and the Chromatics. And
Hmm.
that's how that came about in 2020.
That that is quite interesting. I really love that story. And you also, and of course, you were with the band at the time with Jericho, High on the
Yes.
Hog, and Jubilation. And you
Those were,
also had some other albums too, like Whispering Pines and Rockin' Legacy, and also Wings on Fire. Some of your early works. And tell us more about those.
yeah, well, the Chromatics themselves, we have 18 studio records out because we insist, that's a lot of my background was staying in the studio. So the Chromatics, when they got together and we started playing in 2000, first we had a record out called Levon Helm and the Chromatic Souvenir Volume 1. That was the first one of the Chromatics name. And then when Lee wanted to go do movie scores and or movie parts, and we wanted to keep playing, it became Professor Louie and the Chromatics. And since then, we released 18 records, which was Whispering Pines and all that. But going back to the band records, Jericho was the first major record I did with them as the co-producer and player and stuff. And that's what bared Atlantic City, which was a big hit for the band, good hit for the band, and Bruce Springsteen wrote it. So it was sort of full circle for me to go back, which I had known Bruce in 1977, maybe before. I don't know. Like, I think it was I knew Bruce in, yeah, it must have been around 76. So it was good to do one of his songs, and it's good payback for knowing him with the band. And then after the band ended, 2000, the Chromatics have taken over, and we've put those records out. And the newest one, Crowin Around, I'm exceptionally proud of, because one thing that I wanted to make sure I did was give credit to or not all, but a lot of the artists that I produced and were nice people to me, because sometimes you can end up in a studio and it's uncomfortable. But these guys, like Commander Cody, I don't know how familiar you are with Commander.
Yes, what was it? Hot Rod Lincoln. I remember that. I
Right.
work in a radio station called KFY in Bismarck, and I get requests a lot. Give me that. I got quit that drinking. Hot Rod Lincoln.
That's it. Well, me and Commander Cody were very good friends. He was a great piano player, and I produced about 5 or 6 of his records. And in the studio, he was always respectful, and I would go out on the road with him also to play organ or accordion with George Frayne. That was his real name. And so I decided I would record one of his songs on this newest Crowin Around record. So I'm giving homage to the guys who really influenced me on that level, So we wrote a few songs, and then we intertwined them with groups I produced. So we did Rag Mama Rag by the band. We did that one because that was a good piano one to play. And then I also produced and played a lot with an English artist by the name of Graham Parker.
I remember Graham Parker. Yes, I
Sure.
remember that. Uh-huh.
Yeah, he was happening for, and he's a great singer songwriter. And me and him made a lot of records together. And so I decided we should do one song by Graham that he would get a kick out of. So we recorded a Graham Parker song, and Miss Marie, who was the other singer in the band, she did a great job on his material. And also, since I worked with Dylan off and on different levels, we would do a Bob Dylan song. So we recorded, and Leon Russell. I worked with Leon Russell at one point and worked with Bob Dylan. We did a Leon Russell production that he did with Bob Dylan a song called Watching the River Flow, which is a great song. And we did that. So intertwined with our originals, we did those covers. And then there was a guy on 57th Street when I drove a cab that was always dressed like a Viking, big fella. And I would pick him up feeling that, maybe he was panhandling, you don't know. So 3 or 4 in the morning, he'd be out there and, it could be dangerous. So I'd pick him up and we got to talking. Turns out he was a classical composer that had a record deal with Columbia. He was
Oh,
an
really?
odd guy. I think he was blind. Matter of fact, I know he was. And it turned out he called himself Moondog. And Moondog had some tremendous records and tremendous songs. And if you look up, cult, there's documentaries on Moondog. Grew up out west, somewhere where you guys might be. Grew up on an Indian plantation, reservation, and had a lot of that influence. And he also had orchestration. So we did one of Moondog songs just to keep his name alive, because it's important to do that stuff. Somebody that had that much influence. And he was good friends with Charlie Parker. And he wrote a song called Bird's Lament, because that was Charlie Parker's nickname, Bird. And so we recorded that one with me playing accordion and Larry Packer, who's one of the great unknown violinists, who was the violinist in The Last Waltz and had a group called Cat Mother and the All Night Newsboys, and knew him in New York City because Jimi Hendrix produced his records. And I used to go to those sessions when Larry had this band, Cat Mother and the All Night Newsboys. First group ever to sign to Polydor Records. And so I wanted to get Larry involved in this record, and got me and him did the Moondog song, which is the Bird's Lament, and then used our horn section. So we got a couple horn sections on the record. And so really proud of Crowin Around. It's an exceptional record, and it's just came out last week. It's already starting to get quite a bit of radio play.
Mm-hmm. Certainly did as well. And certainly did as well too. You also have "Workout" as one of your top singles. Also another one which really struck me is called "Strike Up the Band." And tell us more about those.
Well, that record was the record right before, or 2 records before this one, which did really well. It was on the blues and Americana charts for a long time, and that's where the songs "Work It Out." I think that record was almost all original, and we utilized some horn section. I had an old musical friend of mine, John Platania, who we grew up together and played in high school bands together, battle the bands, all that kind of stuff. And John Platania ended up with Van Morrison in around 1969 and wrote all these great guitar licks for Van, a song called Moon Dance, and, a lot of them, all that whole record, that whole Moon Dance record. John was the guitar player, and he's still with Van 40 years later, 50 years later. So John and I went out and played a lot with the Chromatics, and he was on the road with us, and we used him on the Strike Up the Band record. And Work It Out, he kicks it off with his guitar lick and does great guitar solo. He's also on Crowin Around. Not as prevalent because I'm using the road. I wanted to use a lot of the road band opposed to studio musicians on Crowin Around, which is why we're really proud of it. I think this is probably the best chromatic band we have. We got Todd Myhan on guitar and Marie Spinoza, Miss Marie singing the leads with me. And we got Frankie C. on bass, who was Levon Helm's music director, and with Asleep at the Wheel, and Steve Folbert and people like that. And Dan Hickey, who's currently with Shamika Copeland and Might As Well Be Giants. So that's the 5 core chromatics that are on the road playing a lot. And then we pick up the different horn sections. And so we go in the studio and we just record them live and sing them live and doctor them up a little bit, and there they are.
I like that. I love that combination. We'll talk about some of the songs from Crowing Around, including 2 we'll feature at the end of the audio interview on the Mike Wagner Show. We'll find out what they are with Professor Louie and the Chromatics. You listen to the Mike Wagner Show at the MikeWagnerShow.com, powered by SoundCloud Studios, brought to you by official sponsor of the Mike Wagner Show, international warring author Mia Molson's Missing, available on Amazon and paperback and ebook. Also brought to you by Sweet Summits by Serena Wagner, based on the life of David, now on Amazon. Keyword Sweet Summits, Serena Wagner, and the Sensei of Music, Eric Diamond, with All of Me, Strike a Match, and more. EricDiamondMusic.com. New CD coming soon. We're back in the multi-talent Professor Louie and the Chromatics after this time out. We're back at Professor Louie and the Chromatics here on the Mike Wagner Show. We covered a lot of ground with being in the band Grammy nominated singer songwriter, 5 decades of music. But the one we're proud about is Crowin Around. And before we get the two that we're going to be featuring, let's hit upon a few like A Million and Johnny. I think we covered Bird's Lament and just too much fun. We're having too much fun. Tell us more about that.
Well, Too Much Fun is going back to doing a cover song on the record. Too Much Fun is written by Bill Kirchen, Bill Kirchen and the Too Much Fun band, who was Commander Cody's guitar player when they had the Lost Planet Airmen. And Bill and I still see each other. And so Too Much Fun is just a great song to play. It's a fun song. George Frayne, Commander Cody wrote it with Bill and the other guitar player in that band too. So we decided we should record it live. But the one thing, and it's a good swinging piece, because it's a good piano piece. But we did beef it up a little differently than anybody else did because we decided we would use the Woodstock horn section and write an arrangement for it. We got a great horn arranger, Chuck Smith, down in Scranton, Pennsylvania. We play a lot of we're in Pennsylvania playing quite a bit. Well, it's a big state to play. And they got a lot of nice theaters there. And of course, we got a good following there. And so I asked Chuck, we're going to do the new record. I wonder if you would help us write an arrangement for some of the songs. And he wrote a great arrangement for Too Much Fun. And so we got in the studio and played it. And, which makes the band 9 pieces live in the studio. And it came out great. There's a fantastic guitar solo by Todd Myhan. Marie's singing with me and playing percussion, and I'm playing piano. And so it's a good song to do. And it really works live because it's just it's not really quite a boogie woogie, but it's got that swing to it, and it's an homage to George Frayne, the great piano player with Commander Cody. So that's and Bill Kirchen.
I certainly like it. And of course, it makes me think of Monday Boogaloo, one of my favorites.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you enjoyed. Well, that's going back to the Metropole in New York City, where you would because there was a Boogaloo craze across the country at one point. Good dance. It was a dance, and it started, with the Latin groups. The Latin groups were the first ones to come up with the Boogaloo dance, and then there would be Boogaloo down Broadway, and there would be also Dyke and the Blazers had a Boogaloo Broadway in the West Coast. There'd be a West Coast Boogaloo, East Coast Boogaloo. And there was a club that we used to play that Monday nights would get packed with people dancing every Monday night. It became so popular that Willie Nelson used to stop in on Monday nights just to check out everybody dancing. And we'd be playing there and get John Lee Hooker and people like that might just stop. And this is in upstate New York, so they're going out of the way. And a lot of people would stop in Monday nights because it wasn't, it was nothing else going on Monday nights. And it was and so we decided, well, the Boogaloo craze is past, of course, but I wanted to get a dance in and something that we'll go back to the Metropole, and then the lyric, it says Gene Krupa in the window side, side, because people would sit there and watch Gene Krupa play Boogaloo to go-go dancers. You would watch him play that Boogaloo beat. So we decided, well, let's call it Monday Boogaloo because that's what we were doing in the club. Monday nights Boogaloos.
Oh my gosh.
Night. Yeah.
Made me think of like the Whiskey a Go-Go having like a drummer, a DJ, and a dancer just on glass as well, too. It made me think of the Whiskey a Go-Go.
Well, that's what it is. Well, it was the exact same thing. It was the same period, a lot of the same period of time. And that's how they used to track people in New York when they were in the window. They would have the guys come in and trying to pull you in off the street to sit at the bar, and there'd be a go-go girl and a drummer in the window, and then you'd walk in and there'd be a band. And one time, besides seeing Gene Krupa, I saw Dino Danelli, who was the drummer from the Rascals, the Young Rascals. He was in the window. And they were great R&B drummers, but the Boogaloo beat was the one. And the Latin Boogaloo, though, is always really good to go check out.
Anyway, I think we're about to start a new craze here, thanks to the Mike Wagner Show. Bring back the Boogaloo. I like that.
Yeah, on Monday nights, Monday Night Boogaloo. And now by us, I've heard a few times they played it on the radio, and they said, well, we got to put a Monday Night Boogaloo party together. And I was thinking, that's what we're talking about here. People going out on Monday nights and enjoying themselves.
I think we'll start a new tradition as well, too. Make it Monday Night Boogaloo all across the board. And, of course, a couple of songs we will be playing at the end of the audio interview on the Mike Wagner Show. We got Elevate Yourself and Steadfast and True. And tell us more about those.
Well, the thing is I don't teach much, but once in a while, there's 1 week a year I teach down at an organization called Common Ground on the Hill in Westminster, Maryland. and it's a great organization. They bring in musicians and artists from around the world, and it's 2 solid weeks. I only do 1 week. That's as much time as I could take, and you'd be teaching. And the one thing, and you'd be teaching students or sometimes teachers. You'd be teaching teachers because they get credits. And the
Okay.
one thing I notice about the students is maybe because it's the internet or maybe because there's so much out there, their self-esteem and their self-confidence is down a little bit.
Mm.
Now I'm not really sure exactly why. I don't know if I noticed it before COVID, but I definitely noticed it after COVID. And so I started thinking, to write a song, what are we going to write about? Just like work it out. We write a song about people working things out. So what am I going to write for this new record with Miss Marie, my writing partner? I said, why don't we do something that gives people a self-esteem or kids self-esteem and put a good beat to it and put a great horn section to it and good singing, good guitar work. And we messed around with different titles. We had dummy titles and we're writing the song. And we finally settled on, you got to elevate yourself. You got to lift yourself up. So when we're singing it, at least it's not just, a song that just can go by, but it's got a meaning to it, which it tells a story, which you got to do. And sometimes people are down on their luck and you got to help those people out. So
Hmm.
that's how Elevate Yourself, the lyric came about. And I wanted to make sure it was danceable. The whole record is fairly danceable. And so we wanted to keep that going. And at that time, I was working with the James Brown band when I was doing some recording with Fred Wesley. And they were re-recording some of the songs they wrote for James, Hot Pants and stuff. So we were re-recording them. I said, so I asked Fred, show me how you do some of these grooves and some horn section stuff. And Fred was more than generous. He's down in Atlanta, and he was
Hmm.
up at the studio and he was more than generous to show me some things. So we sort of got the grooves and stuff from that period of time that I was with Fred.
That is rather interesting. Plus, Steadfast and True, a bit more about that one.
Well, Steadfast and True, again, we're sort of we cross because we're playing a lot. And these days to play a lot in different venues, because we don't play only big venues. We'll play some small folk rooms, or I like playing the folk rooms because I used to play a lot of duo shows with Rick, acoustic guitar and just accordion. And I got to really like that sound. And I also work with an artist by the name of Guy Davis, Ozzie Davis and Ruby D's son. And we play a lot of folk rooms together as a duo. So with my own group, the Chromatics, I like to play those rooms, even though they only may hold 80 or 90 people. But
Hmm.
you could keep the volume down. You don't need a lot of electronics. And I thought, well, let's get a sort of a folk kind of song. Let's write something like a John Prine kind of story song, but with a meaning again, with a nice family message, because it's about families and brothers and sisters and stuff. So we figured, well, let's write that song, something like that. We changed the lyrics a few times and came up with that and kept it. I think if I remember correctly, it's all acoustic piano, accordion, acoustic guitar with some drums and bass. So that's more on the folk side of things. And I'm really proud of that one. When we play that one live, especially after a loud rocking song, people really snap to attention and like it. So it's worked more than just within the folk clubs.
Hmm. And it certainly does as well, being Steadfast and True. If there's any music we haven't covered, any songs from the Crowin Around we haven't talked about, or anything else, feel free to throw in some of the other singles you like to talk about.
Well, I would like to talk about Johnny because Johnny's written by Miss Marie, who was about her brother again, who had some troubles and all this stuff with kids making mistakes and going a little overboard and passing away. Whether the fentanyl trade or just being crazy and depressed. So she wrote that about her brother Johnny, but it's in an upbeat tempo, and a lot of people and I played a lot of rock and roll piano on it. So the thing I find most enjoyable when people hear it, they like the song, which is, our biggest honor. If somebody likes one of the songs you wrote, it's hard to do, especially if they only hear it once live. And I
Right.
think maybe it's about Johnny Johnson, the great Chuck Berry piano player,
Mm.
because I'm playing, I'm basically trying to steal Johnny Johnson licks from to do the song, and so I find that really interesting. They think it's about Johnny Johnson, and then they listen to it and say, no, I don't think it is. And so it's a good one. So Miss Marie did a great job writing that one.
Hmm. Certainly did as well too. And where can we find Crowin Around and all your works at, Professor Louie?
Well, all the CDs we have, there's a label called Woodstock Records. It's woodstockrecords.com. It's on the internet. And you just go there and you can order there's a lot of great records on the label. It's more than just the Chromatics, Professor Louie Chromatics, but there's a lot of great records on the label. A lot of records I produced, some I didn't. And you can order anything you want from woodstockrecords.com. And there's also links to all the streaming sites and downloading sites, all of them. And then hopefully, I mean, there is a distribution company that works with Stock Records, and hopefully you can order it in any major record store or minor record store. If it's not in stock, hopefully they can find it. It's hard to keep track of that these days because there's not enough record stores. But whenever we go into town, I always try to take a look if I could take some time out. But so you can walk into your local record store, see if you can order it, which is best because then you keep the record stores alive as much as you can, or order it online or go to any of your favorite digital downloads or streaming sites and it should be there.
And we'll certainly check that out. And how about your website?
Well, our website, we have everything listed, and of course, it links up to where you can buy it. Our website is professorlouie.com, www.professorlouie.com, or if you could spell it, thechromatics.com, Chromatics, Crowmatix. It's got the bird sound, birds influence like the hawks, but it's crow. And then we wanted to keep it musical, so we made it Matix, like the chromatic scale, but spelled it Matix.
All right. We want everybody to check that out. We'll be playing Elevate Yourself, Steadfast and True at the end of the audio interview. Encourage everybody to do that. We're here with Professor Louie, the Chromatics here on the Mike Wagner Show. Just a few more things, Professor Louie. What else can we expect from you in 2025 and beyond?
Well, I'd say 2025 has us mostly on tour going around, and we've had some great events. We did a show called Melodies of Christmas. We played that with the local Youth Symphony of New York State and choir. It's about 200 pieces. And it's part of an organization called the Melodies Ward in Albany for the Kids Cancer Ward. And I've been part of that organization 15, 20 years and doing that show. Draws about 10,000 people for the week in this beautiful theater, 5 nights. And it's raised over $10 million for that cancer ward. So that's definitely in the agenda coming out as a video and documentary. And then, we're just playing our shows, playing around and push the record, go to Lexington, Kentucky and play the public radio and shows there at the Lyric Theater and go down south and play. And potentially we got a run of Italy to go play in Italy and places like that. So, we're out here playing. We just finished doing 9 shows at the International Bobsled races up in Lake Placid. So that was a good one. Yeah. So, we're pretty international. There's about 15 countries there and maybe 5,000-6,000 people, for the week.
Oh my gosh, that's so amazing. I love to go up there one day too. And
Yes.
who you consider biggest influence in your career?
I've had a lot of them. So, the whole gospel circuit, and watching those guys, checking that out. Garth Hudson was a major influence on my career and my original music teachers, of course, and, from the schools, because they got me started. The Mighty Gospel Giants was a big one. The bands, Levon Helm. When, I rode that band bus for 17, 16 years with those guys every day that we were on tour. And there was a lot of learning to be had because, they had been together since basically around some of them since 1957, 56.
Okay.
And so they really put some time in. So we would talk about playing those kind of package shows that they would do. And Dion, of course, was a big one when we do the Blues Cruise and he's there. And you could ask him about the Buddy Holly tour and all that kind of stuff, what was going on and why those guys think they had to take the plane and how come nobody's ever interviewed you about it and you were there. So
I think you gave me a good lead on that one. Dion, I'm gonna have to remember that. I wish I could write it down somewhere. So that's a good one. I like these ideas. And what's the best advice you can give to anybody at this point?
The best to music or life wise?
In general.
In general, well, you just got to going back to elevate yourself. You really got to believe in yourself and trust yourself, and don't let anybody discourage you from what you want to do because that's part of the problem. Is there's a lot of people want to discourage other people because they for whatever reason, but don't let anybody tell you can't do something. You got to really try to do it and find your own way. I'm a firm believer in that because, we know a lot of people that was told and some quit and some stay with whatever they believe in, it works out and try to keep an open mind, Try not to close your mind to people so much.
Mhm. And I think that's really good advice out there, Professor Lee. We're here with Professor Lee of the Chromatics here on the Mike Wagner Show, featuring a Crowin Around. We'll be playing a couple songs at the end of the audio interview. Encourage everybody to do that. Professor Lee, a very big thank you for your time. You're absolutely fantastic. Learned a lot. Looking forward to it soon. Keep us up to date. Keep in touch. Glad to have you back. Once again, what's your websites? How do people contact you? Or can people purchase or check out your music?
Okay, well, thanks again for having me on, Mike. It's a real honor for me to be on a show like this. It truly is. The way that people can find is www.professorlouie.com. That's easy. It's just the way it's spelled, professorlouie.com. Or, and that would link you to a lot of our music and all our shows and everything that's going on with us. It's up to date. We try to keep the website up to date. Of course, there's Facebook and all those other, we've got a presence on Facebook and YouTube. There's a lot of YouTube of shows and, different records. And then you can go to the label, woodstockrecords.com. And a lot of our music is listed there. And, you can order and buy. And then any of your favorite, sites like Spotify or iTunes or Amazon. We're on all of that. And the best thing is come to a show, get on our schedule, come to our show, and make sure you come up and say hello to us, because that's always really fun. And somebody comes up and goes, "Hey, I saw you on the Mike Wagner show." That's a
That'd be
thrill,
greatly appreciated. Yes.
Yeah, that's a real thrill. There's no doubt about that. And if we're not in your town playing, then give us an email and say, "We'd like to have you. Here's where you could play in our town." And we pass it over to the agents, and I tell them, "Hey, this is where we got to go, and this is what we want to do." And pretty much they oblige what we want, because we're working all the time, and everybody wants that.
Okay. And how about for the Chromatics? What's the website?
Same thing, professorlouie.com. That is the chromat. It's Professor Louie and the Chromatics. That's the website. So that's what I say. You could either get, if you made it www.professorlouieandthechromatics.com, it would be so long. It's hard enough people trying to find what the heck the name is. Well, it's good to make people think, though, a little bit. Doesn't hurt. And but so that's why I say professorlouie.com or thechromatics.com. Same website.
All right. Well, certainly everybody check it out. Once again, Professor Louie, very big thank you for your time. You've been absolutely amazing. Looking forward to him soon. Keep us up to date. Keep in touch. Glad to have you back. We wish you all the best. And Professor Louie, you definitely have a great future ahead of you.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate you having us on, and good luck with everything you're doing.